Hello and welcome to Right Sports Talk. My name is Zach. And with the NFL season officially being over, I wanted to talk about the teams that hired new head coaches in the NFL and talk about and rank who I think will do the worst in their first season to who I think will do the best in their first season. This isn't who I think will do, worst and best overall in their careers with their teams, but just who I think in their first season will have the worst season, who I think will have the best season. So to start off, the coach that I think will have the worst season with their new team is Dave Canales with the Panthers. So the Panthers, they don't have a first round draft pick because they traded, their first round draft pick this year. They traded DJ Moore and some more assets to the Chicago Bears to trade up to the number one draft pick last year and draft Bryce Young, the guy who they are hoping can be their franchise quarterback and can, lead them back to the playoffs and, be their guy for the future. But for right now, they don't have a first round draft pick. They don't have the ability to add anything around him early in the draft this year. They don't have the ability to add one of the top players in this year's draft to their team. They also have a lack of offensive weapons. Start off with Adam Thielen was their number one receiver last year, which Adam Thielen is a good receiver, but he is getting up there in age and don't know how much longer he could play. They also didn't really have anybody else behind him that proved that they could step up to be the next number one receiver in Carolina. They had DJ Chark and they had Jonathan Mingo, but neither one of those guys really showed anything that proved that they would go up, that they could be the number one target for that team. They also don't have a true workhorse number one running back on their team. They went last year in free agency and brought in Miles Sanders, and he severely underperformed this year. Did not look anything like he did in Philadelphia. Miles Sanders just did not perform like the player they thought they were going to get. Last year, Chuba Hubbard wound up being their leading running back. I'm not saying Chuba Hubbard is not a good running back. I don't see him as a guy that can, touch the ball 20 to 25 times a game for 17 weeks and be a consistent number one running back. So they don't have, they don't have a guy that can be a number one wide receiver going into the future, and don't know how Adam Thielen's going to be with his age. They don't have a guy that looks like he can be a consistent number one running back. On the positive side, their defense has a lot of pieces to be a good defense, and their defense looked really good at the end of last season. So maybe their defense can help them stay in some games and they can win, a few more than 2 games this season. But even with their defense having those pieces, I still think that Dave Canales will do the worst of the teams that hired new coaches. Moving on to Brian Callahan with the Tennessee Titans. So the Tennessee Titans could lose Derrick Henry to free agency this year, and he has been their number one guy, their best offensive player for years now. And they do have Tajay Spears behind him, but he is another guy that has, he looked very good in the small sample size of playing time we saw from him last year. But he's another guy that I don't know if he could be a number one running back that can get 20 to 25 touches a game for 17 games and be consistent. Other than that, on their offense, their wide receiver core, they don't really have a guy that's proven they can step up behind DeAndre Hopkins. So, they got Treylon Burks, who they drafted 2 years ago, but he hasn't really shown anything. So other than DeAndre Hopkins, they don't have a whole lot of options at wide receiver. Also, their quarterback, they don't know if Will Levis can be their guy. They're going to have to give him probably this year to show whether or not he can be their guy. So they know that Ryan Tannehill can't be their guy. I don't know if he's going to be back next in the 2024 season. And it looks like they've decided that Malik Willis is not going to be their guy. So they kind of got to see if Will Levis will be their guy. And they're probably going to have to give him the majority of this season to see whether or not he is their quarterback of the future. And then they need help on their offensive line. Their offensive line just needs help. They need some pieces on that offensive line to help out. Not really a negative or positive for their defense. Their defense is very middle of the road, can help keep them in games, but I don't think they're a defense that's going to be the reason that they win games. I don't think they're a defense that's just going to stonewall offenses and hold them to low points so their offense can do just enough to win. A positive I have for them is they've got the number 7 overall draft pick, so they can do a lot of things with that, whether that's bring in a guy that can, be the number 2 receiver and get a lot of production behind DeAndre Hopkins, or if they bring in the top offensive tackle or guy they see as the best offensive tackle in this year's draft. So they've got a lot of stuff they could do with their number 7 overall draft pick. Moving on, I've got kind of a combination of Jerod Mayo with the Patriots and Dan Quinn with the Commanders. Part of the reason that I have both Jerod Mayo and Dan Quinn kind of in the same ranking is because both of these teams have some very big needs, very similar big needs on their offense. And both of these teams need a quarterback, because the Patriots have seen that Mac Jones or Bailey Zappi is not going to be their guy. The Commanders are seeing that Sam Howell looks like he's not going to be their guy either at quarterback. And both teams need offensive line help. The Patriots' offensive line just could not stay healthy, and they didn't really have the depth at offensive line for when guys went down. And the Commanders, their offensive line was at one point last season on pace to give up the most sacks in history. So both of them need offensive line help. Where they differ, the Patriots also need wide receiver help. They don't really have a true number 1 wide receiver. They really need a consistent, true number 1 wide receiver. The Commanders have good receivers. The Commanders have, Terry McLaurin and Jahan Dotson in the receiving core. And if they bring him back, Curtis Samuel. So they've got what they need at receiver. Now, one of their big differences is their defense. The Patriots have a very good defense. The Patriots consistently have good defenses. The Commanders need help on defense, specifically in their passing defense. The Commanders' quarterbacks are able to throw all over the Commanders' defense this past season. Moving on to Antonio Pierce for the Raiders. He went. Let's talk about the negative. It looks like they're not sure who their guy is going to be at quarterback. So they had Jimmy Garoppolo start some games from last year, and then Aiden O'Connell was their starter for the majority of the season. Aiden O'Connell was a rookie last year, and there were times he looked pretty good, but he's a guy that doesn't look like he could be their guy going into the future. So the Raiders may wind up bringing in a quarterback, whether that's in the draft or bring somebody in free agency to kind of be their guy. And if they can find who they like at quarterback, they're in a very good position. So Antonio Pierce went 5-4 as the Raiders interim coach last season. I believe the Raiders wound up winning 8 games last year. A very respectable season for them. And if they can bring in a quarterback they want, they have good wide receivers. They got Devontae Adams, a true number 1 guy that could be consistently a top 5 receiver in the NFL, and at times could look like the best receiver in the NFL. And they've got Jacoby Myers, who's a very good number 2 receiver. And also at running back, they've got Josh Jacobs, who, if they keep him, very good running back, was the leading rusher 2 seasons ago. They've also got a very underrated defense. Their defense was top 10 in points allowed last season. Very good. They've got Max Crosby, who was in the discussion for Defensive Player of the Year this past season. And, I think just because it's, the Raiders, not a very big market, not really thought of for their, hasn't really been thought of for their defense. Especially when they had Josh McDaniels, who was this offensive coach, but their defense is kind of under the radar good. Like, you don't think that they have, they're not a star-studded defense. The biggest name they have is Max Crosby. That's still, a very big name. Other than that, they have guys that can just, they have very good players on their defense. So I think they can go out and have a good year. They could probably win another 8-9 games with Antonio Pierce. And moving on to my top 3. At number 3, I have Raheem Morris for the Falcons. The Falcons are another team that has these really good offensive weapons. They've got Drake London. They've got Kyle Pitts. They've got Bijan Robinson. They've also got Tyler Algier at running back, who's very good in short yardage situations and near the goal line. And they're just another team that they need a quarterback. Like, they saw last year that, Desmond Ridder, Taylor Heineke are not the guys, but they play in a very winnable division. So even with those 2 guys at quarterback, they were competing for the division until the end of the year. Like, they were in the division hunt until the final game of the season. So I think if they can go out and get a guy they think can succeed in this offense at quarterback, they've got a very good shot to possibly win their division. And they are another team that has a defense that is good enough for them to win with. They've got a defense that's not really going to cost them games. They have some very talented players on that defense. And on the defensive line, they've got Grady Jarrett. They've still got Calais Campbell, who, despite being an older player, is still very good. They've got A.J. Terrell at corner, and they've got Jesse Bates at safety. So they've got some good pieces on that defense, and their defense is good enough for them to win with, especially if they can get a quarterback on offense to kind of put all the pieces together. At number 2, I've got Mike Macdonald for the Seahawks. Now, when Pete Carroll stepped down as the Seahawks head coach, I tweeted that when I tweeted about it, I mentioned that whoever got this job would be getting a very good roster that I think is a playoff caliber roster. So they've got a good defense. They've got, a very good secondary. On offense, they've got very good wide receivers, DK Metcalf, Tyler Lockett, and Jackson Smith and Jigba. They've got Kenneth Walker and Zach Charbonnet on defense, or running back, my mistake. They have running back. And at quarterback, they've got Geno Smith. So they have in Geno Smith a quarterback that can not lose them games, which is a very important trait for a quarterback. He's not going to make a whole lot of mistakes, and he can keep his team in games and can, if needed, can make plays to win the game. Their biggest problem is that the division that they play in the NFC West has 2 teams that made the playoffs this past season, in the Rams and the 49ers. And the 49ers were just in the Super Bowl. 49ers are the NFC champions. And those are 2 teams that are still going to, have very good shots at making the playoffs. They're 2 very talented teams. So the Seahawks have to find a way to just compete with those teams in their division. If they come in second in their division, they probably go to the playoffs next season. At number 1, I have who I think will do the best with their new team for at least their first season there, is Jim Harbaugh with the Chargers. When Jim Harbaugh was hired as the Chargers head coach, I made a video about how he can turn this team around and all the good he could bring for this team. And in that video, I said something that I still believe right now, and that is that he can bring that team to the playoffs and they can win a playoff game. Part of the reason for that is Jim Harbaugh with the Chargers has something that no other new head coach has, and that is their long-term franchise quarterback right now on their roster. He has Justin Herbert, who is the Chargers franchise quarterback. Justin Herbert is a very good quarterback. He has the tools to be one of the top quarterbacks in the NFL. And Jim Harbaugh doesn't have to worry about finding a quarterback this offseason. He already has one. They've got a very talented roster around him. And on top of that, they have the number 5 overall draft pick. And they can kind of bring in whoever they think could help their team with the number 5 draft pick. Whether it's, I'm assuming Marvin Harrison's just going to be off the board. But they could bring in a Rome Odunze or a Malik Neighbors, one of those top wide receivers. They could bring in a Brock Bowers. They can bring in guys that could be starters right away and can help and can contribute to the team for this already very talented roster. They are also in a kind of tough division. I talked about Antonio Pierce and the Raiders earlier. They're a team that I think could win 8 to 9 games. The Broncos are not a bad team. Any team that's coached by Sean Payton is going to be competitive. But I think that this, not to mention, they have to play against the Super Bowl champion Kansas City Chiefs twice a year. I think if they can, win at least, if they can go 3-3 against their division teams, like split with each of them, or win 4, possibly 5 games in their division, with sweeping the Broncos and the Raiders and splitting with the Chiefs. This is a team that I think under Jim Harbaugh and what Jim Harbaugh brings and the culture that he brings can make the playoffs and can win a playoff game. So that is my rankings of new NFL head coaches and who I think will have the worst first season to who I think will have the best first season with their new teams. Let me know in the comments your opinions. Let me know if you agree with me. Let me know if you disagree with me. Don't forget, please like and subscribe. And I will see you guys next time.